I want to talk to you guys about Gavin Newsom's bullshit podcast and why it makes me so mad. So as you guys know, I was just traveling the country and I was out on a job site in Tennessee last week. And I saw a friend of mine who I've worked with for years. He actually used to work for me in Oklahoma back in like 2017. And he was on that job site. He's still out in the field, even though I work at home. And so whenever I get a chance to see him when I'm on a project, I make an opportunity to talk to him as much as possible, enjoy his company. And he always gives me a good perspective on what's going on that job site. And so I was bullshitting with him, and he was with somebody else who I don't know, but we were all just kind of bullshitting. And the guy asked me, where are you from? And I said California, and we were just kind of like back and forth a little bit, just kind of shooting the shit. And he kind of said to my friend, he goes, "Oh, so he probably voted for Harris." This is kind of like around the talking about California and the fact that I'm an environmental manager, so they're kind of like the two together. He was like, "So you probably voted for Harris." And I always like to say this to people who I think probably voted for Trump. It's true in my view, but I always say it just to kind of get a reaction out of them. And I was like, yeah, it's just a little bit of a Republican for my tastes, but yeah, I voted for her. And he laughed, and it was all like in good fun. But anyway, he said at one point, do you like living in California? I was like, yeah, I love living in California. And he kind of was like, "You're crazy." And I was like, "Why?" He goes, "I could never live in California." I was like, "Why?" And he was like, it's too expensive. And I was like, "Yeah, it is. It is really expensive." I was like, you couldn't pay me to live here in Tennessee, which I think is where he lives, even when he's not working on a job site. He was like, "Why?" And I was like, I just kind of like looked around. I mean, like, here, Tennessee's got a lot of beautiful parts to it for sure. But like, it was wintertime, it's winter, everything was kind of dead. And it's not beautiful. Let me tell you that. And where I'm at right now, here in California, it's fucking stunning beautiful. And it is almost all the time. Anyway, so that was kind of a tangent there, but anyway, I was like, I just don't like any of this, and I just pretty much said what I just said, about liking the climate and whatnot. And he goes, "Well, I'm from Florida, and I wouldn't move back there. I wouldn't live there either." And I was like, "Well, why not?" And he said, "Same reason. It's just too expensive. It's just I can't imagine spending that much money to live somewhere." This is why I bring up Gavin Newsom and his podcast and kind of a lot of his extracurricular activities, including his debate with Ron DeSantis. It's really frustrating to me that that's what he's doing with his time. And look, I know the governor can't just single-handedly solve the cost of living crisis. I get that. And I know that he's going to be out of office soon, and he's kind of pivoting to doing other things career-wise and finding other ways that he can have an impact, and I get that too. But it really bothers me that he's spending his time kind of setting himself up as the representative of the left. He's out there debating with Charlie Kirk and Steve Bannon on this podcast, and it doesn't bother me that he's talking to people on the right. I'd rather listen to him talk to people on the right than listen to him just do some circle jerk with Hassan Piker or something. That I'm fine with. But what I don't really care for is that this implication that he's now the representative of the Democrats and that he has this alternative vision to what the Republicans are offering that we can all get behind, because he doesn't. He does not. I made a joke and I made a video about this back in right around when the election happened, and it was just essentially that the Democrats ran a unlikable Bay Area liberal in 2024, and that they. And the conversations around Gavin Newsom indicate that they want to do it again, but they think this time it'll work because he's a white guy, and I don't think it'll work. And it kind of gets back to this, like I said, the cost of living thing. Like, Democrats in general cannot be the party of the working class if the working class cannot afford to live in their states. And that's what we have overwhelmingly as a problem that we are up against in Democratic states. It is expensive to live here. And that was kind of reinforced for me as I went to the grocery store today. And like, I can afford it. I shouldn't have to afford it. I shouldn't have to spend that much money on food. I shouldn't have to spend this much money on gas. I shouldn't have to spend this much money on utilities and all these kinds of things that are just so expensive in California. But like, I can. There are tons of people here in California who can't afford to live here. And I think a lot of people who, you know, there's a lot of attention to these like social issue things, and like that's what Democrats need to adjust on. It's not. Like, that guy that I was talking to on that job site, he didn't bring up any of that shit. And don't get me wrong, like, I'm not saying that he necessarily is like a huge supporter of trans rights or gay rights or anything. But like, I'm a pretty openly gay man. We were bullshitting and having a fine time talking to each other. He didn't talk about literally any social issues at all, not just gay stuff. He brought up the cost of living. He brought up how expensive things are in not just California, but also in Florida, which is another big expensive cost of living state. And that is, I really think, like the winning issue for either party. And I'm not saying that the Republicans are not going to solve that problem. Republican states, all that being said, are cheaper. You know what I mean? And it's you can go in and explain that and argue those points all you want, but when you get down to those basics, like the fact is Democratic states are more expensive, Republican states are cheaper. And it has a lot to do with government making the cost of living so high. That's undeniable. And Democrats need to get on the side of removing those barriers to affordability that government places, because we're the party of government and we believe in government, right? I mean, I say we, the party. I'm not a Democrat necessarily, but we on the left in general are people who believe in government and its ability to do big and great things. Well, good. We should do that, but we shouldn't be the party that defends the government even when it's not efficient, and even when it's not serving people, and even when it gets in the way of things. I mean, the cost of building housing in California is outrageous, and it's because of government. Government is one of the big things in the way of that, and there's study after study after study that shows that. And environmental reviews, and I am an environmental compliance professional. I do that for a living. Okay. I'm telling you right now that the cost of doing an environmental review in California is astronomical. And beyond what you deal with in other states, like a massive multiplier. And it's difficult, right? Because like we want to have environmental protections in place. We don't want developers just willy-nilly building everywhere and damaging historical properties, damaging like the character of neighborhoods, damaging the environment, right? There's obviously it's not just as simple as let them build everywhere, build baby build or something like that, you know what I mean? But on the flip side, that's what government's for, right? And that is what we should be expecting from efficient government, and that's what we should be expecting from democratically run states, is that they're doing that work and that they are willing to look at the failures of government and calibrate and do something different. Because when they don't, Republicans step in and sell voters on this vision of getting rid of government, and we all know that that is not the solution. And it leads to where we are now. That's how there is even the muted response to Doge that we have in this country. If people had a regular interaction with government that was beneficial and helpful and lived up to government's potential to make people's lives better, they would be way more outraged about what's happening with Elon Musk and Doge. But those examples are few and far between. And the Democrats are largely responsible for that. And at the state level, they're responsible for that. And so when we hear from Democrats that, oh, we can't do anything to stop Trump because we don't have any power. Bullshit. You run massive states in this country, states that account for a larger portion of the United States GDP than the red states all combined. You have an enormous amount of power. And they're just failing to use it. And on top of that, their states are the reasons why people like Donald Trump are getting elected, and why Democrats are in so much trouble is because of the failure of Democrats at the state level to address these problems that are endemic in pretty much every single Democratic state. So that's why I'm upset with Gavin Newsom's fucking podcast thing, because you, sir, are not our representative. You are not doing the things that you should be doing to make your state livable. People want to live in California. People shouldn't have to live other places than where they want to live. But there are tons of people who have to leave California because it's too expensive. And that's why. It's not because people don't really leave because, oh, this whole transgender thing or this whole woke thing was just too much, so I had to flee California. No, that is bullshit. It's fake. Anyone who says that is a demagogue. It's not real. The reason why people leave California is because it's expensive. Period. It's the same reason why people leave New York, because New York's super expensive. This is the biggest issue of our day, is the cost of living, and Democrats are failing time and time again to deal with that. And in fact, their policies are leading to things being more expensive, and that has to be addressed. So that I really want to see Democrats do something about that, or just politicians on the left do something about that. But going and podcasting and arguing with Steve Bannon, it's all just performative, which is, again, the problem with Democrats, is they really spend so much time on, ooh, is the message correct? And ooh, is the messenger correct? And not like, are the policies that we are doing and proposing, do those help the people that we need to have vote for us? And you can make those proposals from the left. Like, once again, they see that people have voted for Republicans, so they try to match Republican policy. Not the solution. You can come up with like really dynamic policy that incorporates left-wing ideas and economically left-wing ideas too. This is what drives me nuts, is this conversation about, oh, they've gone so left, but all they're ever talking about is social policy and culture war bullshit. That's not the left. You know, that's what it drives me nuts. When we talk about the left, we need to be talking about economic policy. We need to be talking about like actual governmental, financial, and economic policy. And that's the left. This constant conversation about like social culture war bullshit, and saying that that's the left and we need to tack to the center. We need to be talking about policies that make people's lives better. And that can include civil rights for all Americans, including transgender people. That doesn't need to be controversial. And if you are running a state that is affordable for everyone to live in, and people are able to prosper and live there, then you don't have all these opportunities to scapegoat transgender people or black people or immigrants. All of them. Those cultural war issues don't matter anymore when people can afford to feed their families and can afford to go on vacation and can afford education and all these things. When you have all those things, you don't go looking for people to blame for your problems. So Democrats have handed Donald Trump and the Republicans just every minority group on a fucking platter to allow the Republicans to scapegoat them by letting their cities be so expensive, letting their states be so expensive, letting the cost of living be so expensive, and doing absolutely fuck all about it, except for going on podcasts and debating with fucking Steve Bannon. You know, in California, we produce more food than any other state in the country by a huge margin. We export more food than any other state in the country by a large margin, even bigger than the amount of food we produce, as a percentage of the rest of the country. We feed the entire world, and not to mention feed the United States. It is a huge industry here. And I don't think a lot of people who haven't been to California realize how much food is produced in California. But, you always think of like the middle of the country as being where they grow food. But a lot of that, don't get me wrong, they do grow a lot of stuff there, but it does not. There are counties in California that produce more food than like the combined output of multiple Midwestern states. It's insane. And to do that, we use a ton of water. Our water, the water that belongs to the citizens of California. And specifically the water that comes from up north where I live and is, channeled down south to the valley and to Los Angeles. That water that is critical for drinking and for fires and for all the things that you use water for that aren't agriculture. Okay. That being said, something like 90% of the water used in California is for agriculture. Well, agriculture, despite being as big as I just described, only makes up like 8%. I think actually even less. I'm sorry, no, I think it's actually like 3% of the state's GDP. State's GDP is huge, by the way. It's the 5th largest in the world. Like with other countries, California's GDP is the 5th largest in the world. So very wealthy state producing a ton of food, state using a ton of water to produce that food. But when there are droughts, the penalties land on average citizens. They land on consumers, people like me. Residential use is where you get those restrictions, despite the fact that residential use of water is something like 3 to 7% of the amount of water used in the state. But we get hit with the restrictions. We get hit with the high costs of using the water. We're the ones who get fined for using water when you're not supposed to be using it. All these things that make it expensive for your average person to live, right? What do we get in exchange for that? Just the most expensive grocery bill in the country. Well, in the continental United States. It's more expensive in Alaska and Florida because they have to ship food there from California. But of the continental United States, of the lower 48, I should say, we have the most expensive grocery bills in the country, despite growing the most food in the country. Make that make sense. That's the sort of thing that the government should be fixing. That's the sort of thing that the governor should be fixing. And when you have Democrats running both running the legislature and the governor's mansion, and they can't fix that, then you, Sir Gavin Newsom, should not be trying to represent the left in any sort of debate with the right. You need to get off of your fucking podcast and get to work, or you've lost your chance to prove that you can fix any of these things, because you haven't. You've been the governor for 2 terms. You were the lieutenant governor before that. Cost of living has not gone down. There's barely more housing than when you started. All these issues persist in California at such a deep level, and the governor is doing what he's doing. It's embarrassing. It's absolutely embarrassing. And it's continuing to cede ground to the Republicans. This is why Republicans win. It's fucking garbage. And Gavin Newsom, I fucking swear to God, if he becomes the Democratic nominee for president, I will absolutely combust.